The first thing Eliza ever learned about Wyoming was that the wind did not simply blow. It screamed. It tore across the high country like something wounded and furious, ripping shingles from rooftops and burying the world under walls of white that rose higher than any man's shoulders. The year was 1879, and winter had arrived without warning, swallowing the mountains whole and taking every soul foolish enough to call those peaks home right along with it. But the wind, oh, the wind was not the thing hunting Eliza that night. Her real danger had a name. Harlan Cross, a man who had been carved from cruelty the way other men were carved from stone. Nearly 60 years old, twice a widower, rich enough and mean enough to believe that every living thing in the territory belonged to him by birthright. He had purchased her father's $500 debt like a man buys a horse at auction. Calm, certain, without a flicker of shame. And in return, he had taken her, 19 years old, wearing her mother's wedding dress, the one that still smelled faintly of rose water and something like hope. She had stood in his parlor, a dim and suffocating room that reeked of tobacco smoke and aged leather and the particular rot of old power, and she had listened to a preacher with trembling hands read words over her that felt less like vows and more like a verdict. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled, because this story deserves to travel far. Eliza remembered every detail of that parlor. The way the single oil lamp flickered like it too wanted to escape. The way her father stood near the door with his hat crushed in both hands and his eyes fixed to the floor, never once rising to meet hers. Not once. And the way Harlan Cross's thick, heavy hand had closed around her wrist when she hesitated at the altar, his grip so tight she felt her bones pressed together, and his voice had come down low against her ear. "Say it." "I do," she had whispered. She tasted nothing but ash. That same night, he climbed the stairs behind her, his boots heavy on every step, each one landing like a countdown. He stopped at the top and gave her one single instruction, delivered without looking at her face, the way a man instructs livestock. "Make yourself ready." She stood in that upstairs room alone, in her mother's dress, and she understood with every nerve in her body what was waiting for her in that bed. And she understood something else too, something that rose up from the very deepest part of her, something that surprised her with how loud it was. She would rather die in that storm than spend one single night in that man's arms. Her escape was not planned. There was no map, no horse waiting, no bundle of provisions. It was raw, breathless animal instinct. She reached inside the corset she still wore and felt the small pearl-handled derringer her mother had hidden there years ago, pressed in her hands with shaking fingers and the words, "You may need this someday, my love." "Mama, oh Mama, I need it now." She tucked it close. She moved through the hallway on silent feet, down the stairs, through the dark, out the back door and into the mouth of the storm. The cold hit her like a wall of iron. Her breath vanished. The wind tore at her dress and ripped her hair loose and screamed in her ears like something that hated her. She ran anyway. She did not stop when her satin slippers filled with snow and then tore apart entirely, leaving her feet bare on the ice. She did not stop when Harlan's stallion, the one she had untied from the post in a panic, reared up in terror, threw her off, and thundered away into the white nothing. She ran until she could not run anymore. She crawled until she could not crawl. And then she simply stopped. She lay down on the frozen bank of a creek she could not see and let the cold press her into the earth like a hand smoothing out a crumpled letter. Her wedding dress hung around her in frozen ruins. Her hands had gone beyond pain into something quieter and more final. Her breath came in small, shallow gasps, each one weaker than the last. The mountains received her gently, almost kindly. The world dissolved into a soft, white peace. She closed her eyes. She did not expect to open them again. But someone else was wandering those mountains that night. Stay with me, because what happens next, it will break your heart before it heals it. His name was Caleb. Some people in the valley called him a hermit. Others said he was a man running from ghosts. A few of the older ranchers said he had done something terrible once, something that had driven him up into the mountains and kept him there, far from the reach of town law and the judgment of ordinary men. None of them were entirely wrong. He was checking his trap lines that night more for the distraction than for the pelts, moving through the blizzard with his head down and his collar up and his horse, a broad gray called Stone, picking carefully through drifts that came up past the stirrups. Caleb had lived in silence for 3 years. He had chosen it. Silence did not ask anything of you. Silence did not leave. Stone stopped. His ears went flat against his skull, and he refused to move, standing rigid in the storm and staring at something Caleb could not yet see. He followed the horse's gaze. There, half buried in a snowdrift at the edge of the frozen creek, was a shimmer of silk. He pushed Stone forward, dismounted into the knee-deep snow, and waded toward it. His chest tightened as the shape took form beneath him. A girl, young. Her skin was the color of winter sky, just before dark, that terrible blue-white that means the body has given up fighting. Her hair was frozen to the ice around her head like a halo made of broken glass. What was left of her dress was a wedding gown. He could tell by the buttons, or what remained of them. He should have left her. He knew it even as he stood there. Taking in a stranger meant questions. Questions meant the law, and the law had never once been kind to Caleb Reed. Then he saw it, the faintest flutter at the hollow of her throat, a pulse so weak it was barely a whisper. "Oh, damn it," he said, the words swallowed immediately by the wind. "You're alive." He lifted her, and the lightness of her nearly undid him. She weighed nothing. She was nothing but frozen bones and ice-stiff silk, and whatever desperate courage had driven her out into a blizzard rather than stay wherever she had come from. He wrapped her inside his coat, pressed her face against his chest, and mounted Stone with her in his arms. He rode faster than he had ridden in years. The cabin was dark, and the fire had burned down to barely a glow. He kicked the door open, laid her on the floor near the hearth, and fed the fire until it roared like a living thing. Then he knelt beside her and placed his hand against her cheek. She was stone cold. He had seen this before. A trapper, years ago. He knew what it required. He knew it, and he did it without hesitation and without shame, because the only thing in that room that mattered was whether this girl lived or died. The silk gown was frozen solid around her. The buttons would not yield. He drew his knife and cut the dress away cleanly, hating the necessity of it, feeling the weight of what it must have meant to her. Beneath it was a whalebone corset, equally frozen, equally impossible. He cut that too. Inside it, the small pearl-handled derringer tumbled out onto the floor. He stared at it for a moment, then carried it to the mantel and placed it far out of her reach. When she woke, he did not want her to have to decide what to do with it in the first terrible seconds of consciousness. He stripped to his undershirt, gathered every blanket in the cabin, and lay down beside her on the bearskin rug. He pulled her against him, her frozen skin like a brand of cold against his own warmth, and wrapped them both tight beneath the furs. He rubbed her arms, her back, her legs, his rough, calloused hands working in long strokes, trying to wake the blood beneath the surface. He pressed his lips close to her frozen hair and spoke, not knowing if she could hear him, not caring. "Come on now. Fight. Don't you dare die here. Fight." He held her that way for hours that felt like years. And then, sometime deep in the night, she trembled. Just once. Just a small, shuddering thing that moved through her whole body like a sob caught in a dream. But it was life. It was the most beautiful thing Caleb had felt in 3 years. Eliza opened her eyes to warmth, to the smell of pine smoke and tallow candle, and something earthy and wild, to the weight of a heavy arm around her waist and a solid chest pressed against her back, and heat everywhere, the kind of heat she had forgotten existed. Then her mind caught up with her body. She screamed. She threw herself sideways, scrambling across the rug, grabbing the first thing her hand found, a skinning knife hanging from a hook near the hearth, and she spun around with it raised and her whole body shaking so hard she could barely hold the handle. The man on the floor raised both hands slowly. He was large, dark-haired, dark-eyed, bearded, with a jaw like a fence post and a scar that ran diagonally across his left collarbone. He did not reach for her. He did not move at all. "Easy," he said. His voice was low and rough and careful, the voice of a man used to speaking to frightened animals. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her breath tore in and out of her. "Where am I?" "My cabin. Laramie Range. Found you by the creek." He paused. "You were near frozen, ma'am. Near dead." Her eyes dropped to herself, to the blanket, to the absence beneath it. "You undressed me," she whispered. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not shame, just the clean, painful directness of a man telling a hard truth. "Your clothes were ice. I had to share heat or bury you in the morning. Those were the only two choices I had." Eliza stared at him across the firelight for a long, wordless moment. She looked at his eyes. She had learned, in the last 24 hours, to read men's eyes very quickly. His were tired, deeply, unspeakably tired. But they were not cruel. There was no hunger in them, no possession, no calculation. There was only exhaustion and the quiet aftermath of fear. The wind screamed outside. The fire crackled between them. Two strangers, both wearing the marks of people who had trusted the wrong ones. Both trapped inside four walls by a storm that showed no signs of mercy. And neither one of them could have imagined, in that moment, just how completely their lives were about to become tangled together. Do not go anywhere, because the storm doesn't end, and neither does what grows inside that cabin. You need to hear what happens next. The blizzard did not break that night. It did not break the next night either. For 3 full days, the wind clawed at the cabin walls like something that had a personal grievance with everyone inside. The snow piled up past the window ledges and turned the world outside into a white, featureless nothing. Eliza stayed, wrapped in Caleb's spare wool shirt, the sleeves rolled up 5 times to free her hands, and she kept the knife nearby. Not held, but close. Her fingers would drift to the handle occasionally, just to confirm it was still there, and then she would make herself let go. Caleb seemed to understand. He moved through the cabin with a kind of deliberate slowness, always making sure she could see what he was doing, always stepping wide around her, never approaching without giving her time to see him coming. He spoke only when necessary. He never touched her again. Their world shrank to 10 feet by 12. Rough-hewn log walls, a single window, a stone hearth, a narrow cot, a bearskin rug, a table scarred from years of use. He rose before dawn every morning and stepped outside into the screaming dark to check his traps. He came back with his beard frozen and snow packed into the folds of his coat, and his cheeks red as a wound. Eliza, still weak, still aching in places she couldn't quite name, stayed near the fire and cooked what little there was. Dried beans, venison jerky, so tough it had to be boiled. Dense biscuits she made from the back of a flour sack she found on the shelf. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't the silence she had known in Harlan Cross's parlor. That silence had been full of threat, full of walls closing in. This silence was different. This was the silence of two people sitting in the aftermath of their own separate storms, just breathing, just existing without being required to perform or explain or survive. It was almost restful, almost, because the nights were something else entirely. Eliza slept on the bearskin near the hearth. Caleb stayed on his cot across the room. But the dark had its own particular cruelty, and the moment she closed her eyes, Harlan came with it. His voice in her ear, the weight of his hand on her wrist, the sound of those footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, each one counting down. The door of the upstairs room, the way the lamplight had looked from under it, thin and yellow and indifferent. The second night, she woke up screaming. Caleb was beside her in 2 strides, both hands on her shoulders, his voice cutting through the terror. "You're safe. Eliza, wake up. You're safe. It's me." But she was still in that house. She was still in that room. She fought him, clawing and thrashing and sobbing in a way that had no language in it, just raw animal terror. "Don't touch me. Let go of me, let go." Caleb went still. He felt the trembling move through her like a current, and he recognized it. God help him, he recognized it. He had held someone else trembling like this once, years ago, in a different life. He released her. He slid backward until his spine found the wall, and he sat there, watching her curl into herself on the rug, listening to her cry with a sound that had no bottom to it. He didn't try to speak. He didn't move closer. He just stayed, present, quiet, a witness. After a long time, the crying became quieter, and then she lifted her face from her arms and looked at the embers. "He hurt me," she whispered. Her voice was destroyed. "I was married yesterday, and I ran before he could finish what he started." Caleb stared at the fire. "Cross," he said. It wasn't a question. Her head came up slightly. "Everyone in this territory knows Harlan Cross," he said. "And what he is." Eliza pressed her lips together. "He'll come for me. He always gets what he believes belongs to him." The fire popped and sent a spray of sparks up the chimney. Something moved behind Caleb's eyes. Not rage. Not yet. Something older and heavier than rage. "I had a sister," he said. His voice was very quiet. Eliza went still. Her name was Anna. She married a man who hid what he was like a dog hides a bone. Smooth in public. Charming even, but behind closed doors. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I tried to get to her. I did get to her eventually. One night, found him with his hands on her. It was a knife. I put him down. His jaw tightened. Thought it was over. Thought she'd be able to heal." The wind moaned against the walls. She didn't. He didn't say anything more for a moment. He didn't need to. The silence after those two words was the loudest thing Eliza had ever heard. "They found her shoes," he said at last, "on the bank of the river." Not her. Oh, the weight of those words. Eliza didn't speak. She couldn't. But she felt something shift between them in that moment, something that had nothing to do with attraction or circumstance or proximity. It was simpler and more profound than any of that. Pain recognized pain. It always does. Caleb looked at her, not as a stranger, not as a problem he'd inherited from a snowstorm, but as someone standing on ground he knew the exact texture of, because he had stood on it himself and nearly been swallowed by it. "You're safe here," he said. "He's not getting through that storm. And even when it breaks, he's not getting through me." The words were simple, direct, offered without drama or embellishment. And somehow, they were the most comforting thing anyone had ever said to her. But comfort, as Eliza was about to discover, can crack you open just as surely as fear. And what came out of that crack would change everything. Keep listening. By the third morning, the blizzard had softened to something almost bearable. Pale winter light seeped through the frost-laced window and fell across the cabin floor in long, golden strips. Eliza stood at the glass and looked out at a world transformed, a silence so complete and white that it seemed impossible anything had ever existed in it before. She needed air. She wrapped herself in the spare blanket and stepped outside, boots crunching through the crust of ice on top of the snow. The cold cut through her like a blade, sharp and honest, but she forced herself forward into it. She needed to feel something real. She needed to remember that the world was still out there, still turning, still holding a place for her somewhere in its vastness. She followed the tree line toward the creek. She heard it before she saw it, a sound of splashing water, and then she rounded a stand of frosted pine and stopped completely. Caleb stood at the creek's edge, stripped to the waist, scrubbing the smoke and sweat of 3 cabin-bound days from his skin in the freezing water. Steam rose from his shoulders in the cold air. He moved without any awareness of being watched, with the natural ease of a man entirely alone in the world. Eliza should have turned back immediately. She knew it. She turned the thought over and found it correct, and still could not make her feet obey it. He was nothing like Harlan Cross. Nothing. Where Harlan was soft with age and cruelty, Caleb was carved from necessity. Where Harlan's touch had made her skin try to crawl off her bones, the memory of Caleb's hands warming her back to life in the night had felt like safety, like being held by the mountain itself. The realization struck her between one breath and the next. She was not afraid of him. After everything, after the parlor and the stairs and the running and the freezing, after waking up screaming and fighting and trembling, she was standing here looking at this man, and she was not afraid. The feeling that flooded through her in the wake of that realization was so foreign and so overwhelming that it came out as a gasp. Caleb turned to the sound. Their eyes met across the winter morning. Eliza ran. Her cheeks burned so hot she felt them even through the cold, and her heart was pounding in her throat by the time she stumbled back through the cabin door and pressed herself against the interior wall with both hands over her face. Oh, she was in so much trouble. That evening, the cabin felt smaller than it had ever felt. Too warm, too quiet, too full of something that neither of them had a name for, that sat between them at the small table and crouched in every silence and made the air feel thick. Caleb sharpened his knife on a whetstone. The sound of it, that rhythmic shaying, scraped across Eliza's nerves until she thought she would jump out of her skin. She sat by the fire with his mending in her hands, a pair of trousers that needed a button reattached, and she could not get the thread through the needle. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate. They kept shaking. They kept remembering. She set the mending down. She stood up. She walked toward him. He went still when she stopped in front of him, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his skin. His hands rested on the table, knife set aside. He lifted his eyes to her slowly, cautiously, the way you look at something that might run or might not. His eyes were confused, careful, and beneath both of those things, something that had been locked away for a very long time, something that looked painful to keep locked, something that looked like longing. "I can't let fear be the only thing left inside me," she whispered. He stared at her. Her hand rose, and she pressed her fingertips to the scar on his chest, the long diagonal one she had noticed that first night. She felt him breathe in sharply. "I don't want his hands to be the last thing I remember," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she held herself steady. "Please, let me choose something different." Something behind his eyes came apart. He stood up slowly from the chair, rising to his full height, and she had to tilt her head back to keep his gaze. He was so much bigger than her. He could have been terrifying. He wasn't. "Eliza," he said, and his voice was rough and low and breaking. "I'm not." She grabbed his shirt in both fists. "Please." Something inside Caleb breathed, something that had been sealed shut for 3 years under grief and guilt and the particular cold of complete solitude, cracked open. He kissed her. It was not a gentle thing. It was not careful or practiced or soft. It was two broken people finding each other in the dark and holding on with everything they had left, which wasn't much, but which was real. It was devastatingly, achingly real. But when he felt her tremble, when fear slipped in through the warmth, and he felt her body shift from choosing into enduring, he broke away. He stepped back, breathing hard, his hands raised between them. "No," he said, more to himself than to her. "Not like this. Don't stop." Her voice was a ragged whisper. "Please don't stop." He took her face in both hands, gently, with a care that made her eyes fill, and he tilted her head until she was looking directly into his. "Are you sure?" His voice was barely there. "Eliza, you have to be sure. This has to be yours." She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she pulled him down into her and kissed him back. And for the first time in her 19 years of living, Eliza was not being taken from. She was talking. She was choosing. She was free. But morning came, and morning had a cruelty all its own. What happened next nearly destroyed them both. "And I need you to stay, because it gets so much worse before it gets better. And the avalanche, oh, the avalanche. Stay. Please stay." She woke to silence. The heavy, pressing silence of a world buried under snow, and the particular kind of silence inside the cabin that told her, before she even opened her eyes, that something had changed. Caleb was already dressed, already across the room, already somewhere far away behind his own eyes, staring at the wall with his hands gripped on the edge of the table like he was trying to hold it down. He didn't look at her. Eliza sat up slowly, the blanket around her shoulders, and she watched him not look at her. She felt it happen in real time, the way last night's warmth drained out of her chest and was replaced by something cold and familiar and devastating. He regretted it. She had begged him. She had come apart in his arms like something that had no more seams left. And now, in the flat gray light of morning, he couldn't stand the sight of her. She spent the day in quiet, furious motion, scrubbing pans that were already clean, sweeping a floor that didn't need it, mending every torn thing she could lay hands on, all to outrun the truth building in her ribcage like flood water rising. She was not unwanted. She was a burden. She was a problem he had stumbled over in a snowdrift and now could not get rid of. When Caleb came back in with firewood that afternoon, he threw it into the box hard enough that she flinched. He still didn't look at her. "Storm broke," he said. His voice was flat, foreign, the voice of a stranger. "You can leave." Her breath caught. You won't last 10 minutes out there alone," he said. "But you're not staying here." The words hit her in a place that had nothing to do with shelter or warmth or survival. They hit her in the exact same place Harlan's hand had hit her wrist in that parlor. The place that said you're not wanted. You're not worth the trouble of keeping. "Caleb, please." And then he exploded. "You lied," he said, and his voice was not flat anymore. It was enormous, filling the cabin, pressing her back against the wall. "You hid what you were carrying and dragged Harlan Cross's trouble straight into my home. I can't be found with you. Do you understand what that means for me? Do you have any idea?" "I was afraid," she cried. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to bring this to your door. I didn't want." "Well, you did," he said. "You should have stayed with your husband." The world stopped. Those words, those particular words, shaped exactly like every terrible thing she had ever been told about her own worth, her own right to exist safely in the world. "You should have stayed." Eliza's legs felt like water beneath her. She felt herself sway. She saw something flicker across Caleb's face when he saw what the words had done, something fast and stricken, but his jaw was already set and his anger had already swallowed him whole. "Go," he said. "Get out. Now." He tore the blanket from her hands. She stepped out into the night. The cold hit her like a slap from the earth itself. She stood in his wool shirt and his trousers and nothing else, her bare feet on the ice, and she walked. She did not look back. She did not let herself. She didn't have enough left to look back. Inside, Caleb stood before the fire and told himself it was right. He told himself it was survival. He told himself she would find her way down the mountain and back to some version of safety, and that he had done everything he could and more. He told himself these things with great conviction. And then his eyes drifted to the table. The tin cup she always used. The small one with the chipped rim that she held in both hands in the mornings while she stared out the frost-covered window. There was a faint mark on the rim where her lip balm had touched it. Something so small. Something that had no right to carry this much meaning. It looked like a drop of blood. It broke him like an axe through greenwood. He saw his sister's shoes on the riverbank. He saw Anna's face the last time he'd held her. He saw Eliza's eyes in the dark the night she'd said, "Don't stop, please don't stop." And he understood suddenly and with the force of a physical blow what he had just done to her. He had sent her out. He had looked at her the way Harlan Cross looked at her, and he had told her she should have stayed, and he had sent her out into the night in nothing but his own clothes. "Oh God, what have I done?" He was through the door before the chair finished falling. He saddled Stone with hands that shook so badly he dropped the cinch twice, and then he rode into the black, screaming her name until his voice cracked and the mountains threw it back at him in pieces. He found her tracks, small, stumbling, the footsteps of someone who had stopped believing there was anywhere left to go. He followed them up the mountain. The sound started beneath him, a low groan moving through the rock and ice and deep-packed snow of the ridge above, the sound of something enormous deciding to let go. He looked up. Too late. The avalanche came down the face of the mountain like the hand of God. It came fast and white and total, and it hit with a sound that was not like any sound Eliza had ever described because Eliza was somewhere beneath it. Stone reared. Caleb was thrown. The snow hit him like a wall of moving stone, and for a long, crushing moment, there was nothing but white and cold and the absence of air, and then he was clawing his way upward through the dark with nothing but his hands and the terrified animal needed to get to her. He broke the surface gasping. He looked around at a world remade and unrecognizable. Eliza, nothing. He didn't stop to feel his shoulder, which had met the rock at a wrong angle and screamed at him with every movement. He dug. He moved through the field of fresh fallen snow with his hands, following the direction of her tracks until the moonlight caught on something dark beneath a granite overhang. A shape, still, curled against the rock like something trying to make itself small enough to disappear. He felt at his knees beside her. His hands found her face. Her skin was ice. Her lips were the color of frozen creek water. "No," he said. It came out broken, torn from somewhere below his chest. "No, no, no." He gathered her up. He put his mouth against her hair, and he held her like a man holds the only thing left in the world that matters, and he walked. He carried her home. He kicked the cabin door off its hinges. He built the fire until it roared. He stripped off every layer between her skin and warmth, wrapped them both in every blanket he owned, and held her against his chest with her face pressed to his throat, willing his own heat into her with everything he had. "Stay," he whispered, over and over, a prayer that had no words beyond that one. "Stay. Stay with me. I am so sorry. I am so sorry, Eliza. Stay." The fire roared. The hours moved like cold honey, and then she shuddered, a long, full-body tremor that moved through her like the first crack of ice in spring, and he felt it against his chest, and his eyes filled so fast he couldn't see. Her breath came out as a broken moan. Her eyes opened, unfocused, glassy, but open. "Caleb," she breathed. He bowed his head over hers, and the tears fell in her hair, and he did not try to stop them. "I'm here. I came for you." He pressed his lips to her forehead, her temple, her cheek. "I will always come for you. Do you hear me? I will always come." Her fingers moved, weak, trembling, barely more than a flutter, but they found his face and rested there. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "No." His voice was fierce and wrecked all at once. "Don't. I don't care about Cross. I don't care about any of it. I care about you, and I almost lost you, and I will never forgive myself for those words." He pressed his forehead to hers, both of them damp with tears and fire warmth. "Never again. You hear me? Never again." By morning, they both knew the truth of their situation with clear and unsentimental eyes. Harlan Cross would never stop. He had the money and the ego and the fury of a man who believed he had been robbed of property. He would search these mountains until he found her, or until something stopped him. "We go to Laramie," Caleb said. "We go to the judge. We tell him everything, every word of it, and we get you free. Legally. Permanently." Eliza looked at him across the fire. "He'll try to kill you." Caleb met her eyes without blinking. "Let him try." The town of Laramie was loud and muddy and crowded and overwhelming after the white silence of the mountains. They rode in on Stone, Eliza sitting behind Caleb with her arms around his waist and her face pressed between his shoulder blades, and they went straight to the one lawyer Caleb trusted with his own life. Harlan Cross arrived before the ink was dry on the complaint. He came thundering down the main street on his black stallion with 2 hired guns flanking him, and he pulled up hard when he saw Caleb standing in the street in front of the lawyer's office with his arms loose at his sides. Eliza was behind him. "You'll hand over my wife," Harlan said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had never once in 60 years been told no and made to believe it. "She's not your wife," Caleb said. Cross's men reached. Caleb drew. 2 seconds. 2 men in the mud, one clutching his gun hand, one face down in the street. Caleb stood with the gun still raised, steady as the mountains he lived on, and looked at Harlan Cross with eyes that had absolutely nothing left to lose. The town was silent. Every soul on that street saw it. Every soul watched Harlan Cross sit on his expensive horse and look into the eyes of a man who could not be bought or threatened or moved, and for the first time in his long and cruel life, Harlan Cross looked small. His power died there in the mud, in front of witnesses, in the middle of a Tuesday morning. The hearing that followed was brief. Eliza stood before the judge with her hands folded and her chin up and her voice shaking only a little, and she told the truth. All of it. The debt, the parlor, the preacher's trembling hands, her father's eyes on the floor, Harlan's grip on her wrist, and those words, "Say it," and the ash taste of her own compliance. The judge listened to every word. He picked up his gavel. He brought it down like a man who had heard enough. "This marriage is hereby annulled. Eliza Bethpage is a free woman under the law of this territory. Mr. Cross, you will remove yourself from this town immediately, or you will be removed." Harlan Cross left. He left loudly. He left furiously. He left with promises of retribution still hot on his lips. But he left, and something about watching him ride away, watching his broad back get smaller and smaller until it disappeared around the bend, made Eliza's knees fold under her. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. He held her there in the street while the snow fell softly around them, fat, quiet flakes that had nothing of the blizzard in them, just winter being gentle for once. She pressed her face into his coat, and she wept. Not from fear, not from cold, not from grief. She wept from the extraordinary and unfamiliar sensation of being safe. Truly, completely, finally safe. When she lifted her face, Caleb was looking down at her with an expression she had never seen on a man's face before. Something open, unguarded, without demand or ownership in it. Something that looked a great deal like reverence. "It's over," she whispered. He pulled her close and pressed his lips to the top of her head. "No," he murmured into her hair. "It's just beginning." Their beginning led them back to the mountains, to a hidden valley where the wind still screamed in winter but couldn't find them the same way anymore. They built a cabin together, log by log, their hands learning the shape of shared work. They built a life from the wreckage of two lives that had nearly been extinguished. And one spring morning, they found a small child alone on the high trail, no more than 3 years old, with no name and no shoes and eyes like pieces of winter sky. They brought her home. They named her Rose, and she grew up between them, wild and laughing, running through the mountain meadows while her parents watched from the cabin door with their shoulders touching. 1 year after everything. 1 year after the storm and the creek and the avalanche and the mud street of Laramie. Snow falling soft and light outside, just flurries, peaceful ones. Eliza leaned in the cabin doorway and watched Caleb splitting wood in the yard, his breath rising in clouds, his movements easy and familiar, as she felt that warmth move through her again, the one she had first felt at the creek's edge and had never once stopped feeling since. He looked up and found her watching. He smiled, a slow, private thing. "Quit staring," he called. She smiled back. "I'll quit when I feel like it." He dropped the axe. He crossed the yard in long strides, and he lifted her off the ground, and he pinned her gently against the doorframe, and he kissed her in the slow, unhurried way of a man who knows he has all the time in the world and intends to use every second of it. When he pulled back, she was laughing. Little Rose came barreling around the corner of the cabin and crashed into both of their legs, and they caught her between them and held on. The mountains stood around them, ancient and indifferent to everything that wasn't this exact moment. And Eliza, who had once tasted nothing but ash, breathed in pine smoke and with shavings and the cold, clean air of the high country, and tasted something she had almost died without ever knowing. She tasted home. Tell me in the comments what part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it the parlor? The avalanche? Those words he said to her before he sent her out into the cold? Because some of you know exactly what it feels like to have someone make you feel like you're the problem. Like you should have just stayed. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. You never were. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground, finding your people, and reclaiming the life that was always meant to be yours.